The woods outside our village were a place of secrets. They weren't just trees and dirt, they were alive. The air itself felt different under the canopy of ancient oaks and gnarled pines. It hummed with a strange energy, a sort of low thrum that vibrated right through the soles of your boots and up into your bones. Everyone in town knew to stay away, especially after sundown. They told stories of strange lights and whispers that could drive a person mad, but for me and Chester it was a place of endless fascination. We were drawn to the mystery, to the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a world much older and more powerful than our own. It was a dare we couldn't resist. At the heart of these woods stood the sunken church. It wasn't really sunken, not anymore. The ground had shifted centuries ago, leaving the old stone structure tilted at a strange angle as if it were perpetually bowing to the forest. Ivy clung to its walls like a thick green cloak, and the bell tower leaned so precariously it looked like a strong gust of wind could topple it. The windows were long gone, replaced by dark, gaping holes that seemed to watch you as you approached. The townsfolk said it was a cursed place, a scar on the land where no good thing could grow. But we knew better. We knew it was a place of magic. Tonight, the magic felt stronger than ever. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an unspoken promise. A sliver of a moon hung in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced between the trees. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like a word spoken in a language we didn't understand. Chester and I moved slowly, our hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against our ribs. We weren't supposed to be here. My mum had made me promise, her eyes wide with a fear I didn't comprehend at the time. But the pull of the unknown was too strong, a siren's call that drowned out all warnings and all common sense. We reached the edge of the clearing that surrounded the church. From here we could see it all, the crooked steeple silhouetted against the dark purple sky, the crumbling stone walls that seemed to absorb the faint moonlight, giving nothing back. It looked like a forgotten tomb, a monument to something the world had tried to bury and forget. But it wasn't forgotten, not by everyone. We crouched behind a thicket of thorny bushes, the branches scratching at our faces. The air grew colder, and a strange sweet smell like damp earth and burning herbs drifted towards us on the breeze. Something was about to happen. We could feel it, and we weren't going to miss it for anything. Then the humming started. It was low at first, a single resonant note that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It wasn't frightening, not yet. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way. The sound wrapped around the trees and filled the clearing, weaving through the silence of the night. It felt ancient, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. The sound grew louder, joined by other voices. They blended together in perfect, chilling harmony. It was a song without words, a melody of pure emotion that spoke of sorrow and power and secrets kept for generations. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. This was the sound the villagers whispered about. Chester grabbed my arm, his eyes wide in the gloom. He was scared. I could feel him trembling beside me. I was scared too, but my fear was mixed with a powerful curiosity that held me in place. The humming intensified, rising and falling in waves. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical presence. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, a deep thrum that matched the beating of my own heart. The witches were here. We had never seen them before, only heard the stories. They were described as monsters, twisted hags who stole children and cursed the crops. But the sound they made was not monstrous, it was enchanting. Slowly, figures emerged from the shadows of the forest. They moved with a silent grace, their dark cloaks blending into the night. One by one, they stepped into the clearing, forming a circle in front of the tilted church. I counted them, 13. They stood with their heads bowed, their faces hidden by deep hoods. The hymn continued to pour from them, a constant stream of mesmerizing sound that seemed to make the very air shimmer. It was a ritual. We were watching a secret ritual, something no one from the village was ever meant to see. The danger of our situation settled heavily in my stomach, a cold knot of dread. We were intruders in a sacred space. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee through the woods and never look back. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my eyes glued to the scene unfolding before me. The melody was hypnotic, pulling me in deeper. It felt like I was in a dream, a strange and terrifying dream from which I couldn't wake. Chester was frozen beside me, his grip on my arm so tight it hurt. We were just two boys hidden in the bushes, watching something far beyond our understanding. We were playing with a fire we couldn't control, and I had a terrible feeling that we were about to get burned. The humming stopped. The sudden silence was more jarring than the sound had been. It crashed down upon the clearing, thick and absolute. For a moment, nothing moved. The 13 figures stood as still as statues, their cloaked forms like monoliths in the pale moonlight. Then one of them stepped forward into the center of the circle. She was taller than the others, and she moved with an air of authority. She raised her arms, and the long, flowing sleeves of her cloak fell back to reveal her pale hands. The air crackled with energy, and the sweet smell of burning herbs grew stronger. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. She began to chant. Her voice was low and clear, cutting through the silence with words I didn't recognize. They were sharp and guttural, yet they flowed with a lyrical quality. As she spoke, the other 12 witches began to move, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. Small sparks of light like fireflies appeared at their fingertips. The lights danced and swirled, growing brighter and more numerous with every chanted word. They spiraled towards the center of the circle, converging around the lead witch. The ground beneath them began to glow faintly, tracing the outline of a complex symbol etched into the earth. It was real magic, undeniable and terrifying. Chester let out a small gasp, and I quickly clamped my hand over his mouth. We were too close, far too close. The glowing symbol on the ground pulsed with a soft green light. The lead witch lowered her hands, and the swirling sparks coalesced into a single, brilliant orb of light that hovered in the air before her. It pulsed in time with her chanting, a living, breathing thing made of pure energy. The power radiating from it was immense. I could feel it pressing in on us, a heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't a simple charm or a harmless spell. This was something powerful, something dangerous. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The stories from the village painted these women as evil, as creatures of darkness. But what I saw was not destruction, it was creation. They were weaving light and sound into something new, something breathtaking. The scene was terrifying, yes, but it was also beautiful. The raw power on display was awe-inspiring. I found myself leaning forward, wanting to see more, to understand more. It was a fatal mistake. In my eagerness, I shifted my weight, and a dry twig snapped under my foot. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent clearing. The chanting stopped. Every hooded head snapped in our direction. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the clearing. Every witch was frozen, their heads turned towards our hiding spot. I could feel their collective gaze pierce through the bushes, through the darkness, pinning us in place. My blood ran cold. My heart, which had been pounding a moment before, seemed to stop altogether. We were caught. The thought screamed through my mind over and over again. We were caught. Chester was shaking uncontrollably beside me, his muffled whimpers escaping through my fingers. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. It was a childish hope, and it shattered in an instant. 2 of the witches broke from the circle. They moved without a sound, gliding over the grass like spectres. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. They knew we were trapped. With every step they took, the knot of fear in my stomach tightened. I risked a glance at Chester. His face was pale, streaked with tears, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it stole my breath. This was my fault. I'd dragged him here. I'd pushed us to stay, to watch. The weight of my guilt was crushing, heavier than any magical force. The witches were getting closer. I could hear the soft rustle of their cloaks. They stopped right in front of our bush. I could see the hem of their dark robes, the toes of their simple leather boots. I didn't dare look up. I kept my head down, my hand still clamped over Chester's mouth, as if that could somehow make us invisible. A hand, slender and pale, reached through the branches. It didn't grab or pull. It simply pushed the thorny branches aside, clearing a path. The movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly terrifying. There was no escape. The clearing was behind them, the dark forest all around us. We were surrounded. Slowly I lifted my head. I couldn't see her face, hidden deep within the shadows of her hood. All I could see were her eyes. They glowed with a faint, otherworldly light like embers in the darkness. They weren't angry or hateful as I had expected. They were ancient and filled with a strange deep sadness. Her gaze wasn't accusatory, it was full of pity. She looked at us, two small, frightened boys who had trespassed where they did not belong. Then her gaze shifted to the lead witch, who still stood in the center of the circle. A silent question passed between them. The lead witch gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, and our fate was sealed. The lead witch raised her hand. The glowing orb of energy that had hovered before her shot towards us. It wasn't a violent movement. It drifted through the air like a soap bubble, silent and graceful. But the power contained within it was immense. It pulsed with a vibrant emerald green light, illuminating the clearing and casting strange, dancing shadows. Chester finally broke free from my grip, letting out a terrified cry. He scrambled backwards, trying to crab walk away, but there was nowhere to go. The two witches stood over us like sentinels, blocking any path to freedom. My body was frozen, locked in place by a fear so absolute it felt like paralysis. The orb stopped directly in front of Chester. It hovered just a few inches from his face, bathing him in its eerie green glow. He stared at it, mesmerized, his tears reflecting the light. The lead witch spoke a single word. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried across the clearing with impossible clarity. The word hung in the air for a second, and then the orb flared. A brilliant flash of emerald light erupted outward, so bright I had to throw my arm over my eyes. It wasn't hot, but I could feel the wave of energy wash over me, a strange tingling sensation that made the hair on my arms stand on end. There was a sharp yelp from Chester, a sound that was cut off abruptly. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness again. The witches were still there, standing in their silent circle. The two who had cornered us had not moved. Everything was the same, except for one thing. Chester was gone. Where my friend had been cowering just a moment ago, there was now only a small black cat. It sat on the flattened grass, blinking its wide green eyes. It looked confused, disoriented. It shook its head as if trying to clear it. And then it looked at me, and in that moment I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. Those were Chester's eyes. My paralysis broke. A strangled cry escaped my lips. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling, refusing to accept what I had just seen. "Chester?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The black cat let out a small, plaintive meow. It was him. They had turned him into a cat. The horror of it crashed down on me, a physical blow that left me gasping for air. This wasn't beautiful magic. This wasn't awe-inspiring. It was cruel. It was monstrous. The lead witch lowered her hand, and her gaze met mine from across the clearing. There was no malice in her eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. Then she and the other witches turned and melted back into the forest, leaving me alone with the thing that used to be my best friend. The forest was silent again. The witches were gone. The glowing symbol on the ground had faded, leaving no trace. It was as if the entire event had been a nightmare, a figment of my terrified imagination. But it wasn't a nightmare. The proof was sitting right in front of me, washing its face with a tiny paw. The small black cat, Chester, looked up at me, its green eyes wide and pleading. A wave of nausea washed over me. What was I supposed to do? How could I go home? How could I explain this? My mind was a chaotic storm of fear, grief, and confusion. I had to get out of there. I had to get us away from the church, away from the woods. I scooped him up into my arms. He was surprisingly light. He didn't fight me. He just curled up against my chest, trembling. I could feel his tiny heart beating frantically against my ribs, a mirror of my own. I started walking, stumbling through the undergrowth, away from the clearing. Every shadow seemed to hold a hooded figure. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered spell. The woods that had once been a place of adventure were now a labyrinth of terror. I held Chester tighter, burying my face in his soft fur. He was all that was left of my friend. He was my responsibility, my fault. The walk back to the village felt like an eternity. With every step, the reality of the situation sank deeper. Chester was gone, replaced by this small, furry creature. Would he be like this forever? Could the spell be broken? The witches had shown no signs of reversing what they'd done. They had simply left. I thought of Chester's mum, of how I would ever face her. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, making each step heavier than the last. I broke through the tree line and saw the familiar lights of the village cottages ahead. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Home, safety, but the relief was short-lived. As I got closer, I saw that something was wrong. There were too many lights. Not the warm, welcoming glow of lanterns in windows, but the flickering, angry orange of torches. A crowd had gathered in the village square. Angry voices carried on the night air, sharp and jagged. I slowed my pace, my heart sinking into my stomach. I recognized the voice of Mr. Gable, the blacksmith. He was shouting about curses, about dark magic seeping from the woods. He was talking about the witches. And then I heard my name. Someone had seen us. Someone had seen us go into the woods. My blood turned to ice. They knew. They weren't just angry at the witches, they were angry at me. I ducked behind the stone wall that bordered old Mrs. Higgins' garden, peering through a gap in the stones. The village square was a sea of furious faces, illuminated by the bobbing torchlight. Mr. Gable stood on a barrel, his face red with rage, waving a pitchfork in the air. He was pointing, not towards the woods, but towards the lane that led to my cottage. He was shouting about colluding with evil, about bringing a curse down upon the village. They thought I was one of them. They thought I was in league with the witches. Fear, cold and sharp, stabbed at me. This was a different kind of fear from what I had felt in the woods. The witches' magic was terrifying, otherworldly, but this was the fear of my own people, my neighbors, the people I had known my whole life. Their faces were twisted with hatred and fear, their eyes shining with a righteous fury that was far more terrifying than any spell. They weren't looking for understanding or explanation. They were looking for someone to blame. And they had chosen me. Chester the cat stirred in my arms, letting out a low growl as if he could sense the danger. I had to get home. I had to warn my mum. Keeping to the shadows, I crept along the back lanes, my feet silent on the dirt path. The angry shouts followed me, a constant menacing rumble. I could hear them starting to move, a mob with a single purpose. They were coming for me. I reached my cottage and slipped through the back door, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mum was inside, her face pale, her hands twisting in her apron. "Corey, where have you been? The whole village is in an uproar. They're saying you were in the woods." Her eyes fell on the cat in my arms. "What is that?" Before I could answer, a rock shattered the front window. My mum screamed. More rocks followed, thudding against the wooden walls of our small home. The shouting was right outside now, a wall of sound filled with malice. "Witch lover, come out!" Mr. Gable roared. "Face your judgment." They weren't going to listen. They weren't going to let me explain. They had already decided I was guilty. They saw the strange events, the supposed curses, and their fear had boiled over into hate. They needed a target, and the boy who dared to enter the forbidden woods was the easiest one to choose. We were trapped. My mum grabbed my arm, her knuckles white. "We have to go, Corey, now!" Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were firm. The banging on the door grew louder, the wood groaning under the assault. It wouldn't hold for long. "The tunnel," she whispered, her gaze flicking towards the old stone fireplace. "The tunnel." It was a secret my dad had built years ago, a relic from a more dangerous time. It was meant to be an escape route leading from behind the hearth, under the garden, and out to the riverbank. We played in it as children, but I never thought we would have to use it for its real purpose. It was our only chance. She pulled at the loose stone at the base of the fireplace. It came away with a grating sound, revealing a dark, gaping hole. A gust of cool, damp air flowed out, carrying the smell of earth and river water. The pounding on the door intensified, accompanied by the splintering of wood. They were breaking through. "Go," my mum urged, pushing me towards the opening. Take the cat. I'll be right behind you." I hesitated, not wanting to leave her, but the look in her eyes told me there was no time to argue. I clutched Chester tightly and crawled into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and low. I had to crawl on my hands and knees, the rough-hewn earth scraping my skin. Behind me, I heard my mum scramble in, pulling the stone back into place just as the front door of the cottage crashed open. The shouts of the villagers filled our home, but they sounded muffled and distant from inside the tunnel. We crawled in darkness, the only sound our own ragged breaths and the frantic thumping of my heart. Chester was still, a small, warm weight against my chest. The tunnel was longer than I remembered, a suffocating, earthy blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. My fear of the mob behind us warred with the claustrophobic terror of the tunnel itself. I just focused on moving forward, one painful shuffle at a time. Finally, I saw it, a faint circle of grey light ahead. The exit. We scrambled the last few feet and burst out from behind a thick curtain of willow branches on the riverbank. The cool night air felt incredible on my skin. We were free. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, listening. The sounds of the mob were faint now, a distant, angry murmur from the other side of the village. We had escaped. I looked back at my mum. Her face was streaked with dirt, her dress torn, but she was safe. She looked at me, then at the small cat in my arms, her eyes filled with a million questions I didn't know how to answer. We sat by the river's edge, the water flowing silently past us under the dim moonlight. The rage of the village felt a world away. There was only the gentle lapping of the water and the chirping of crickets. I finally let the events of the night wash over me completely. The enchanting hymn, the terrifying magic, the flash of green light. Chester, I looked down at the black cat curled in my lap. He stared back at me with those familiar, intelligent eyes. He was still in there somewhere, trapped inside this new form. A tear slid down my cheek and fell onto his fur. He nudged my hand with his head, a small gesture of comfort that broke my heart. My mum put her arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. She didn't press for details. She just sat with me, offering a silent strength that I desperately needed. I tried to make sense of it all. The villagers, my neighbors, had wanted to hurt me. They had wanted to hurt my mum. Their fear had turned them into a monster, a raging beast with torches and pitchforks. They spoke of evil, of the darkness in the woods. But they had been the ones to shatter our windows, to break down our door, to scream for judgment without a trial. They were ready to condemn a child based on whispers and fear. Then I thought of the witches. I remembered the lead witch's eyes. They weren't filled with hate or malice. They were filled with sadness, with a deep weariness. They had transformed Chester, a cruel act, yes, but why? Had they been trying to protect their secrets? Had they seen us as a threat that needed to be neutralized? Their magic was strange and powerful, something beyond my comprehension. But was it evil, or was it just different? They hadn't chased us, they hadn't attacked us. They had performed their ritual and left us to our fate, a fate sealed not by their magic but by the fear of my own people. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a new, terrible thought began to form in my mind. Who were the real monsters in this story? The witches in the woods, practicing their ancient secret magic, or the townsfolk, my friends and neighbors, who let their fear twist them into a hateful mob? I looked down at Chester, who purred softly in my lap. We couldn't go back, our home was gone, our lives in the village over. We were outcasts now. I didn't know where we would go or what we would do, but as I stared into the dark flowing water, I knew one thing for sure. The world was not as simple as I had once believed. Evil didn't always wear a dark cloak and chant in the woods. Sometimes it carried a torch and looked just like your neighbor.